What's going on, people? We are Tottenham TV, back here for another Tottenham update, and an interesting one today because last night Paul O'Keefe, the transfer guru that is Paul O'Keefe, was on with our very good friends from Last Word on Spurs, and he's given us a very much an extensive update prior to the end of the Euros, where it's going to go absolutely in overdrive, the transfer window. Players do report back to Hotspur Way 1st of July. So we're really not that far away, about 10, 11 days away from it. So let's get into what Paul O'Keefe was saying on Last Word on Spurs last night. And we'll start off with him. He says that he thinks that Spurs will add around 5 to 6 players this summer, and says that Reguilon, Spence, Rodon, Højbjerg and Lo Celso will most definitely go this window. So nothing really new there. But in terms of individually, Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, he says that Pierre will definitely go this transfer window. He didn't go to Australia because he knows that he's leaving, and everyone is in total agreement on that front. The club side, the player side, the agent side, everyone is just in complete total agreement that Pierre-Emile Højbjerg will be leaving this summer. So no surprise to you all on that one. Which I found quite interesting was the Joe Rodon situation. He says that Rodon is very happy, was very happy at Leeds last season, playing regularly. However, Leeds do have £193 million worth of outstanding unpaid transfer fees. And with no promotion, that makes it very hard for them to finance any deals this summer. And all 3 promoted clubs are interested in signing Joe Rodon. He also said that obviously with that figure, Leeds will have to make some sales this summer, and big sales at that. And he spoke about Archie Gray, and he says that Spurs have been watching and scouting Archie Gray, and Leeds do have to sell as they are in financial difficulties. But he finds that Archie Gray will be a very difficult deal for Spurs to do, seeing as over 30 clubs are looking at him.
Yeah, not just Premier League, from abroad as well. So a lot of competition for Archie Gray, one of the most sought-after youngsters currently in England. So for me, unless Tottenham are willing to outbid other clubs and get into a big bidding war, which historically they haven't been willing to do, I do agree with Paul O'Keefe. It's going to be extremely difficult. It's no surprise that a lot of clubs are after him. In case of Joe Rodon, even without that unpaid transfer fees, I still feel like Rodon will probably want a Premier League move anyway, seeing as Leeds didn't get promotion. I don't think he'd want to spend another season in the Championship, seeing as he had such a great year last year. He's proven what he can do in that division. Yes, he might have been happy, but I can't see Rodon willing to take another year in the Championship when he's already proven that he's too good for that division. So for me, I think it makes more sense for him to go to a Premier League club.
Yeah, and as we said, 3 of the promoted clubs are all interested in acquiring his services. So I do expect one of those clubs to agree a deal with Spurs. Ben Davies was actually a really interesting one, and he says that Spurs absolutely adore Ben Davies and are prepared to let him decide his own future, and could even go as far to offer him a new deal, a new 1-year extension. And if he wants to stay as a backup option, that's up to him. But if he wants to leave for first team football, then they will sanction a move, which I thought was interesting, because it's not very often that you find a player at a club, particularly at Spurs, where they'll just let themselves decide their own fate.
Well, I think they respect a player who's been here for now over 10 years. I think it's going to be 10 years this summer. So when a player has shown you that level of commitment and has been that good of a servant, I think it's only respectful that you kind of give him as many options as possible. And as well, to be fair to Davies, and even last season, when he was called upon, he played quite well, and he came in and did a good job. I do think he's a good player. I do think he's not one of these players who I think is a massive liability. I do think his time at left-back is over. I think when he does play at centre-back, that's his role now. But at 30, does he want to see out the rest of his career on the bench at Tottenham, or does he want to go somewhere where he's going to be playing regularly? And that's a decision he has to make, and I think for him, it'll probably be best to move. And I think for Tottenham as well, it'll be best to get someone who's probably better suited to the system than Ben Davies. Not to say he's a bad player, but I just feel like he's not the perfect fit anymore.
Yeah, I kind of do feel that Spurs maybe won't offer him the new contract, and maybe he will stay for the coming year and maybe see out his contract, and then he'll have his pick of clubs to go to. They were talking on Last Word on Spurs about him potentially being a coach for Spurs in the future, and I can definitely see that one happening.
Definitely. He seems that kind of character.
Yeah. Manor Solomon, no surprise, says Spurs are prepared to let Manor Solomon leave this summer. And Paul was just talking about how peculiar the situation is. You know, he's come in, his injuries just seem to be getting worse and worse as time progresses. Nothing seems to be healing there, and did allude to maybe something fishy going on in the background with this one.
Like what do you mean fishy?
Maybe it could be something politically driven.
Yeah, I mean, there are rumours about it. I mean, nothing concrete, of course. We know he does have historically bad injury problems. He had that at Fulham, so that also plays into that. But he was supposed to be back, wasn't it, in February, March, and it just kept getting delayed, and until now, where he has recently posted videos and pictures of him training and getting back to full fitness, but obviously Tottenham haven't selected him, or he's not been available for selection. For me, I never really thought it was a smart deal to begin with. I never thought he was good enough, to be honest. I thought he's clogging up a space in the squad, but I was willing to give it a go as a free transfer. He's now come and pretty much been out for the whole season. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, the whole background with him and his social media posts does, for some people, it causes a negative reaction. And maybe Tottenham looked at that and thinking it's not worth the hassle, which I think would be a shame if that was the reason that we decided to be open to selling him. I think it should always be based on footballing reasons, in my opinion. But wait and see what happens. We'll see if anyone comes in for him, if we get a fee for him. I reckon a loan deal. I reckon he'll be going out alone. I don't think anyone's going to come in for a permanent deal.
Let's talk about Oliver Skipp now, as he says it's likely that Ollie Skipp ends up staying because of the homegrown and club train numbers. However, he does want to leave and he does want to go and play regularly. If a club does come in for him, it puts the club in a difficult situation. We know we did a video not long ago about, you know, Spurs' desperate need for club trained players going into Europe next season. But it's a bit of an awkward situation, isn't it? Because Spurs need the club-trained players, but Ollie Skipp himself wants to leave and further on his career and go get, consistent game time, which I think he deserves. And they were likening it to maybe not exactly the same situation, but Japhet Tanganga, where we never really did his career a service. And I feel like this could be falling down that category with Ollie Skipp.
Yeah, I feel like Skipp's a bit different just because injuries... I felt like he was actually getting into the first team and he was going to be a big player for us, and he had that injury and it really curtailed him. I don't think it was Tottenham specifically. Once he comes back from injury, he finds himself behind some very good players, and I think it's always going to be difficult for him to win his spot back with the midfielders that we have. So, and also I think he has had chances, and maybe not as much last season. Maybe last season not as many, but I think he has had chances in general. So I think for him, he does need a move, because I think he needs to find his rhythm again. He needs to be playing consistent first-team football. And I do think there's a really good player in there. We know the potential of Ollie Skipp. But at Tottenham, the competition for places is so great that he's never going to get that consistent game time, I feel, to feel his way back to his best. That's what he needs. So I feel for him. I do think there's a good player there. But I think the time is right at the moment if we do get a good offer. But that does all raise awkward questions. You say, what do we do? Do we sign a homegrown player, or I'm not sure, what do we do? Do we promote someone from the youth? It's an awkward one.
But if we do keep him, we're keeping him because of the club trained status and the numbers that we're struggling with there. We're not keeping him because we think he can, challenge Rodrigo Bentancur or Yves Bissouma and all the midfielders that we do have at the football club. So if we do keep him, we are stagnating his career. And we are kind of not doing him a service for his career. Tottenham boy, come through the ranks, done really well when he did break into the team. And we are, having a big hand in stagnating his career.
Well, I wouldn't say up till now we have, but if we do
I'm saying if we do keep him.
Then you could argue that, definitely. But then it would be up to him to show that he's good enough to start, obviously. And he could also look at it as an opportunity. Look, I'm going to stay at a really good club like Tottenham, who's my boyhood club. And if I believe in myself and I believe I'm good enough to get in this team, then he's got an opportunity to get back in it. But it would be a shame if we get a good offer and we reject it because of the homegrown quota. That would be a massive shame. So I do hope we do what's right by him.
Yves Bissouma. Paul thinks that Bissouma will stay this summer and it will take a bid of 40 million plus for Spurs to come to the table to negotiate. However, Paul doesn't think that kind of bid will come in for Bissouma. And they had a bit of a debate and a conversation about the drop-off in Yves Bissouma. You know, ever since that Luton red card, he has nowhere near got back to his best, and they maybe suggested why that's come. Is there trouble behind the scenes? What has come about? Why has Bissouma not been able to hit those heights again? We remember at Brighton on a consistent basis, week in, week out, he was performing at a top level. First 10 games of the season last year, performing at a top level. But when you look at it now, 2 years at Tottenham, and you can only say for 10 games he's performed consistently at the required ability, the required level.
I thought he ended the season fairly well, to be honest. Maybe not to the level he was in the first 10 games, but I thought it was a fairly good level of performance. But yeah, that's the reality. If you take it over a 2-year period, it hasn't worked out thus far. If you're judging it by a transfer, you have to say it hasn't been a wild success, albeit we see what he's capable of and we know what he's capable of. I think 40 million probably does make sense, because I do think the quality of the player is probably worth around that. Obviously, we signed him for 25 plus 35 million in add-ons. So, plus 10 million add-ons to take it to 35. So if we got a bid of 40, that represents a profit, which maybe Tottenham looking at and thinking a profit would be a good deal. But in terms of Bissouma, I believe he's a good player. I believe if we can get him playing like he was in the first 10 games consistently, it would be worth keeping around and would have a very good player on our hands. But at the moment, it's difficult to argue that we can get that player consistently, considering it's been 2 years and he hasn't been able to perform at that level for more than that 10-game period.
It really is an annoying one with this, because it's a player that we all believe in. We believe in his abilities. We've seen firsthand what he can produce. And when he's at his levels, in those first 10 games of the season, he was a match for any midfielder in the Premier League. We were talking about him compared to Declan Rice, and we were saying the first 10 games of the season, he can do stuff that maybe Declan Rice can't. So that's the most frustrating part, isn't it?
Definitely. And we were waxing lyrical about Yves Bissouma at the beginning of the season, not just because of the potential he has, but because of what he was showing on the pitch consistently. The stats were up there, the eye test was there, he was in phenomenal form. So the drop-off has been majorly frustrating. And it's even gone so far as people now going from waxing lyrical to considering, or even some people wanting him to leave at the end of the season, which is a massive shame. No one would have thought that after 10 games. But let's hope, if he does stay here, which I do think he will be, he can get back to those levels and show it consistently, and I believe he can.
Let's talk about Coutinho Romero now, because everyone's seen those links to Real Madrid come up in the past couple of weeks. Paul says the club are saying that under no circumstances will Coutinho Romero be sold this summer and are not prepared to engage in any of those discussions. Paul's opinion, though, is that if we were to receive a bid of close to 100 million this summer, we should potentially accept it, as Paul fears that Coutinho could be potentially running down his contract with 3 years left to go. And Spurs should potentially offer him a contract this summer to see where his head lies.
I wouldn't do it this summer. I would wait a year, because next year he's still going to have 2 years, so it's still protected. And if you do it this summer, you're risking him not accepting a contract, in my opinion, and then that looks worse. And I feel like he's a big part of the squad. Right now, we're still not at the level where I think we can tell Coutinho, yes, we're moving in the right direction, but I think we need to show on the pitch that we have ambition, we're matching his ambitions, and we can challenge right at the top, and we can challenge for big trophies, and we can only do that by showing it on the pitch. If we say to Coutinho now, sign a contract, otherwise we're going to sell you, that's not clever after only one transitional year of Ange. We need another year of the project to then really convince him that we're moving in the right direction. I do believe he believes we're moving in the right direction. So I wouldn't offer it this summer. I'd offer it next summer. And if next summer he rejects it, then I think, yeah, probably sell him. If that's his head's at, I'm going to run down my contract, then with 2 years left, that's the time to sell him. I wouldn't do it this summer, or at least I wouldn't push it too much this summer.
If a bid of 100 million or 90 million, close to 100 million, does come in this summer, in your opinion, what do you think the club should do?
If a bid of 100 million for Romero comes in this summer, I'll reject. I think it should take more than that. A player of Romero's quality doesn't come around too often, and obviously I'm a big fan of his. We're in a very good financial position, especially if we can get the players that we want out the door as well for some sort of fee. So if I want Tottenham to have the best chance of competing at the top next season, I think it means Romero being at the team. Now, look, if you're telling me it's getting to 120, 130 million, then I think maybe I'd consider it a bit more, because maybe we can sign a really good defender for like 50, 60 million, and then we'll have a lot of money to improve the rest of the team. But for 100 million, I don't know. 100 million doesn't tell. I don't know. I don't think I'd do it for 100 million.
100 million is a hefty fee.
Yeah,
a
but
world record fee for a centre back.
But you look at the fee that other clubs have demanded for their centre backs, and I feel like Romero is one of the best in the league. So that's the fee we should be commanding for him. I don't think 100 million. If we get 100 million through the door, yes, that's a lot of money, but we have to replace Romero and get a player similar quality to Romero. It's not gonna happen.
I mean, you can do that with 100 million, and less than 100 million you can do that with.
Yeah, but why would you spend? Well, you wouldn't. You're not gonna get 100 million just to spend 100 million on another centre back.
I think you can replace Romero for less than 100 million. First of all, second of all, we got Dragus in there, and third of all, if you get 100 million and you in your mind you're thinking Romero is going to run down his contract and you're going to get nowhere near that over the next couple of years, then maybe it's the smarter move to make.
I'm saying in a year's time you can still get 100 million in my opinion.
You reckon with 2 years to go?
Why not?
Potentially.
We got 100 million for Kane and 1 year left.
Yeah, but I do think Kane and Romero are different kettles of fish.
Well, Romero is one of the best centre-backs in Europe.
Yeah, but Kane is literally like one of the best players in the world.
Yeah, but Romero is also younger. He's 27. He's a world champion. He'll still have 2 years left.
I agree. I do think Romero is at the elite level. I do think that, but
I don't think this year or next year. I don't think 1 year changes his valuation.
And
I
also,
think the valuation only changes once you go to the last year.
And also, Kane was much more valuable to Spurs than maybe a Romero was because of the academy thing. He was the face of Tottenham for the last 5, 6, 7 years. I do think Kane's valuation, and he's a striker as well. So I do think Kane's valuation and Romero's valuation are not. You can't compare them really.
I don't. But my point is, if we're demanding 100 million this year, I don't see why that changes in a year's time.
Because if we're demanding too much with 2 years left to go, and teams balk at the decision, then all of a sudden, and he doesn't get sold, all of a sudden he's going into 1 year left, and then the price dramatically decreases.
Yeah. So you're saying next year if we demand too much, yeah, but it's still in his last year, you're still looking at a hefty fee even if he doesn't sign, in my opinion, if we want to sell him. You're still looking at 60 million probably plus. So I don't know. I wouldn't accept 100 million. I don't think the price dramatically changes in a year's time anyway if he doesn't sign. So I think we should be calm about the situation. And if we have a great year next year and he's central to it, there's no reason for him to be itching to leave.
Let's talk about Emerson Royale now. Paul says that Spurs and Milan are very close in valuation and the deal is close. Once Emerson goes, then Spurs will be looking for right-sided fullback reinforcements. However, Ali Gold gave us an interesting update just now, and he says it's understood that Emerson simply wants to play regular football next season, whether it's at Spurs or elsewhere. Tottenham are yet to hold formal talks with AC Milan over a deal for Emerson. Milan have spoken to the players' camp and believed to have shown the strongest interest of any other team so far, but there's no formal bid to speak of as of yet, and Brazilian side Flamengo are also interested in bringing in Emerson back to his home country.
I think that probably makes sense because Ali Gold gets a lot of his sources through the club. So when he's talking to the club, he's kind of like a mouth in an unofficial, or used to be anyway, like an unofficial mouthpiece of what the club's stance is on certain situations. So of course, they're not. Maybe it's not formal talks. Maybe they're informal talks, and that's what Paul O'Keefe is referring to. There's general chatter what the kind of bid's going to be, and then once they can agree what the bid should look like, then you'll see AC Milan submit a formal offer. So it doesn't surprise me that there's not a formal kind of bid come in for Emerson just as of yet. I think that's usually how these things work anyway. But I do believe the clubs have been speaking, and I do believe there will be an offer from AC Milan sooner rather than later. So we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, we're going to go in and talk about the incoming names that he was talking about. But before we do that, I did mention at the beginning of the video, he suggests that 5 or 6 players will be coming through the door this summer. That's just an opinion. It's not fact or anything like that. So don't go hounding him saying, you said 5 or 6 players, only 4 players have come in, blah, blah, blah. But that was just an opinion from Paul O'Keefe. But another opinion that he did say, out of those 5 or 6 players, that 2 of those players he thinks will be like kind of marquee signings. So in the big bracket of 50 to 60 million to come in. And out of those players, he thinks that it will be an attacking option and a midfield option will be the potential marquee signings coming in this summer.
That's right.
And the first player I want to talk about is Ederson, because he's been heavily linked with Spurs over the past couple of weeks. And Paul O'Keefe was suggesting something very similar to what you've been saying over the past week. And he says Ederson to Spurs is not happening. Spurs won't spend 40 million on a backup right back. They admire Ederson, but Paul doesn't think it's a deal that Spurs will sanction.
Yeah, and I look, whether you think that's right or wrong, I think that makes sense from their position. I never thought we'd spend that much money on a player who is going to be a competition for right back when we've got a very good one in Pedro Porro right now. Yes, he can compete with him, but I don't think you have to spend that amount of money on a player just to compete at right back. I think you can spend money for a player who a sufficient amount of money for a player who can do a job and fill in at that role, or maybe even promote someone from the youth who you believe can do a job there, rather than spend that 40 million. And I think that money is better spent elsewhere, in my opinion. That's not to say that if we do spend that money, it's the wrong decision, because I think healthy competition is great and it'll only improve the team. But I don't think it's absolutely necessary you spend big money on a player just to compete at right back. That was my position, and maybe the club agree. We'll have to wait and see.
It seems as though they do. Let's talk about Eberechi Eze now, the one that everyone wants. Palace have made it clear to Spurs that it would take a massive chunk of the 60 million transfer fee up front for Spurs to sign Eberechi Eze. He is the one that Spurs want in that position, and they have made him a priority target for this summer. It will all come down to if Spurs can negotiate favourable financial structure, and this won't be resolved quickly, he said. He said, in his opinion, there is no reason why Spurs can't go and do this deal, as it's well within their financial remit. Tottenham can do it, and it's just a question of will they do it.
That's what we've been saying. That is exactly what we've been saying. Like, yes, Tottenham always going to want the financials to be in their favour. They're always going to want the deal to be structured in a way that there's not too much money up front. There's then their costs in the short term are not too big, and the costs can be spread over multiple years. That's how they're going to want it. But with the release clauses and things like that, a lot of the money does have to come up front, and it's about they have the money, but it's about, are they willing to put their money where their mouth is and just have a big outlay right now to bring in a player, rather than say, oh, the outlay is too big in the short term, so we're going to move away because we'd rather sign a player where we can stretch out the cost over many, many years. And for me, when a player like, as I said before, when a player like Eze comes available and he's available and he's wanting to come, and you're able to afford him, those opportunities don't come that often, and you've got to take them when you can. And for me, Eze is one of those players where if he's available and you can get him, you just got to get it over the line because he's that good. I think he's a game changer, and I think any team would be better off having an Eze in their team than not. So I just feel like, get this deal done, Tottenham, and if it means paying the 60 million up front, just pay it, because if you don't, you regret it. You will regret it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that wholeheartedly. But what's interesting actually is, because a lot of people have been saying, including ourselves, that it's going to be hard for Palace to see Elise and Eze both go in the same transfer window,
and
right?
Guehi.
And Guehi, yeah, which is also rumoured to go. But Fabrizio Romano said actually last night that Palace have offered Elise a new contract with a new release clause to make him stay for one more further year. Does that maybe signify that that maybe Eze is potentially closer to leaving, or does it signify that Elise is closer to leaving?
I would suggest that it probably signifies that Eze is closer to leaving, albeit there are rumours that Chelsea, I think it's Chelsea, Bayern Munich and Newcastle are all wanting to activate his release clause and talk to Elise. So I think you can look at it both ways, but I guess if Eze was close to leaving, you'd have to offer Elise a contract to him as well. For Elise, who signed a contract last season, didn't he? A 5-year deal. If his release clause is being activated and they're worried about him leaving, then they would also offer him a contract to try and renegotiate that release clause, so that to ward off the competition. So it's tough to know what it could be. Both. It could be both are close to leaving, and so they don't want to lose both. So they offered them contract because they don't. Elise is talking to other clubs, and Eze is also close to leaving. So it could be all three.
I got a feeling the way I'm looking at it is that I feel like both could be potentially close to leaving, but Eze's stance on leaving might be a bit harder than Elise. So they're trying to convince Elise just to stay that other year. They know the release clause is there, so it could be well out of their hands if a team stumps up the money. The teams that you mentioned actually was it Chelsea, Newcastle, and Bayern Munich. I believe that Bayern Munich are actually the only ones that can trigger the release clause because it has to come from a Champions League club, though.
Yeah, that's what people have said. I don't know exactly. Some people are saying it has to be a Champions League club to trigger the release clause. Other people are saying Chelsea are able to trigger it. I don't really know the specifics of the contract. But if it is true that only Champions League clubs can trigger it, then it is only Bayern Munich who can do it. In terms of the stances of both players, it makes sense because Eze is that bit older. And he doesn't want to probably spend more time at Palace than he needs to. Or at least say still, 21, 22?
Yeah.
He can spend another year at Palace and it won't affect him too much.
Yeah. All right. Well, from that, Eze is our priority transfer target for this summer, which is music to all our ears. So go get the deal done, Tottenham. Let's talk about centre-backs now, because it obviously is very much highlighted that Spurs do need a left centre-back. And Paul O'Keefe says Max Kilman is now of interest of Spurs, with West Ham interested as well. Paul did mention that he's not sure if he buys it, though, as the price quoted is 45 million, and he's unsure if that's within Spurs' price remit. And Spurs will spend on essentially what would be a backup left centre back, and also questions whether Kilman would be willing to move to Spurs to get limited game time, where he could go somewhere elsewhere and be probably a starter at, let's say, a West Ham or maybe another club around the Premier League. He also did say that Murillo, Calafiori and Guehi have all been targets that have been scouted this summer's transfer window. However, in my opinion, I don't think Guehi is a goer. I just don't think Spurs will... The money that Palace are going to want for Guehi is just going to be way too much.
Well, they're not prepared to pay for Kilman. They're not going to be prepared to pay for Guehi.
Exactly.
Guehi's going to be a lot more expensive. In terms of Kilman, I actually do like him, and I actually do think on the ball he would fit Ange's philosophy, and I also think he could probably fit a left back and left centre back as well. Although he hasn't played too much at left back for Wolves, he has played the left centre back role, which actually profiles quite similar to a left back because he has to spend a lot of that time in the wide area. He's quite good on the ball. Not the paciest, but he's actually not as slow as people think. So I do think he would be a good option. But 45 million, I don't think we're going to pay that, to be honest. I think
it's more than we paid for Van de Ven.
Yeah, and a similar amount, isn't it? And I think Calafiori, obviously, if we're going to pay 45, you might as well either spend a bit more or that kind of money on a Calafiori if we are able to do it. So I wouldn't be mad at it if we are interested, but I think there are better options out there. In terms of the other options, obviously Calafiori would be the number one. Guehi, I think, is a no-go, and Murillo. I like Murillo. The only thing is I don't know if he can play that the left back role as well as the left centre back. I think the other guys can. So
the thing is, though, the need for a backup left back might be a bit further down on the pecking order now because of Van de Ven's emergence and playing left back towards the latter stage of last season. We saw him in a friendly play there as well to a really good level, in my opinion. So maybe Van de Ven can go be the backup option if a doggy gets injured, and then we do bring in the backup left centre back in the centre back position.
Yeah, it's a fair point.
But in terms of Calafiori, actually, an interesting update from Fabrizio Romano last night saying that Bologna don't really want to deal with Juventus, seeing as they didn't like the way that they took Thiago Motta off them, the manager that's just gone to Juventus. So they prefer to listen to offers to outside of Italy.
What did that Italian journalist saying? Tottenham are waiting. Tottenham are lurking around. So let's hope that we can pounce.
Yeah, let's hope so. In terms of the midfield situation, he says that both Ederson and Onana are on the list of Spurs targets for this summer. Spurs very much like both players, and Paul suggests that Spurs could spend big in this area with a ceiling of 65 to 70 million pounds.
That's what it's going to need. I'm not saying we have to spend that much. I'm just saying we have to be prepared to spend that much for our first option. And we can't be cheaping out because this is a very important position. In terms of Onana, I've got reservations about him. I like him. I think he's a really good player. Don't get me wrong. I think in certain systems he could be potential. If we had Conte in charge, he might be my number one. I think in that double pivot role, he'd be brilliant. In the number 6 role, you need a bit more composure, a bit more ability to control games, a bit more technical ability. I'm not saying he doesn't have technical ability. He does, but I don't know if he has it to the level required to be an outstanding option in that position that we need. Ederson, I do think, has more technical ability than Onana. Similar reservations, but less reservations with Ederson than I do with Onana, because I do think he's more technical and has more of ability to do that. So I think Ederson would be my priority there.
Yeah. And if we can bring in, let's say, an Ederson and an Eze this summer, I mean, that would go some way to, you know, satisfying the fans' need to bring in, you know, top targets, and it will do us the... I mean, those are signings that can take us on to the next level.
Agreed.
And last but not least, let's talk about Lucas Bergvall. He says that Bergvall is going to be integrated straight into the first team next season, and the club have massive hopes for him. He suggests that maybe he'll start off just in the Cups and the Europa League games, but people within the club think that he could be pushing towards maybe the second half of the season, you know, a first team spot in the Premier League as well.
Well, that's really encouraging, and that's really exciting news. And maybe we're going to look at Bergvall as maybe a backup to Maddison for the first half of the season and see how that goes. So that could be another option filled there, and that's super exciting because we've seen how he's been wowing in the Swedish league. Obviously, he's still 18, very young, but a lot of people very excited about him. And if we believe he's going to be ready for the first team next season, then that just shows me that we really believe that this talent is ready for now, and he's actually ready rather than a player who's going to be good in the future, which is really exciting news.
Yeah, well, that is your Tottenham Paul O'Keefe extensive update from yesterday's stream on Last Word on Spurs. Big up to Ricky Stacks, Lee McQueen and Paul O'Keefe for delivering that for us yesterday. If you haven't checked it out, please do. But yeah, once again, put your comments in the comments section below, like, subscribe and comment, and as always, come on you Spurs.